Okay.
Good afternoon, Jamie.
Good afternoon, Ade. Great to see you.
Thank you, you too. It's been a while, but we've known each other for a little while,
A long time.
a long time. Really grateful for you making the time to have this conversation with me. I'm going to talk about your interest in artificial intelligence. You're more of an expert than me, so I'm going to embarrass myself by trying to explain all the things that you do, all the interests that you have. But maybe we'll start by you just introducing yourself and we'll take it from there.
Fantastic. So I'm two things. I'm a barrister, so I spend my days arguing cases in the courts and tribunals of England and Wales. And I'm also a kind of quasi-academic, so I write books and articles and think and speak about how digital technology is changing politics, law, society.
Where did that interest come from? Because you've been talking about this before it became sexy and fashionable many years ago. You've also, and the bio is available, you've also gone to Harvard to really research this in depth. And again, this was before we've had this really big interest in it, before models like ChatGPT were made popular. Where did the interest first stem from?
The very honest answer to that is that it's a bit of a weird family business. So in 1983, my dad was asking questions about artificial intelligence. He was a scholar, he was a researcher.
At the London School of Economics?
At Oxford, I think.
Oxford.
And so he was asking questions about the intersection of the law and artificial intelligence. He was in fact asking, could a computer ever do legal reasoning? And this was years before I was even born. And that's a question that's kind of animated his life. Like most children, I was pretty clear in my own head that I would never do anything similar to my parents. So I never thought this would be where I ended up. But then I got to university myself around about 2007, 2008, 2009. And if you remember, that was the time that social media platforms were just becoming a thing. It was the very early days of smartphones. And it seemed to me to be strange that I could do a humanities degree in history and politics. But none of the textbooks which I was reading, which were explaining the nature of society, by reference to concepts, economic concepts and social concepts and historical concepts, none of them were taking into account these enormous technical changes, which even then were already becoming pretty clear. So it was strange to me that I could do a social science degree or a humanities degree at that time without even once having to mention the internet. So that was when the flame was really lit. Then I went off and became a lawyer, but again, it struck me as odd that so many of our old legal categories and areas of practice and the way we worked as lawyers was perhaps a little bit in the past, or at least it occurred to me that it might be interesting and fun to see if I could think about what was happening in the future. So I took a pause on my legal career, I went away, I did some studying, some research, and I wrote my first book, Future Politics, and took it from there.
Future Politics, which, if you remember after your book signing, it's probably the first book my daughter was reading. I mean, she was like 4 months, so she wasn't, she was looking.
It's child abuse.
trying to push her in the right direction. Because I'm interested in the future as well, and how the intersection of politics, technology, how do we picture these things? The UK government had a summit on this recently, which I think you had a lot of input into. This idea of future politics, how was the process of coalescing all your thinking and research onto text? How was that process for you?
So stepping back, the question I asked myself at the start of that book project was, to what extent is our conceptual and political vocabulary adequate for describing the world that we're moving into? Do our words and concepts only really describe a past that we've left behind? And I expected to come up with the answer that no, we needed a whole host of new words. Just like in the 19th century, they came up with all kinds of new words to describe things like socialism or capitalism. I thought we might need some new stuff for this century, and we do. So words like, for instance, platform is obviously an old word, but in a new context. But what I discovered when I was writing that book and thinking about it was that actually our source of ideas is pretty deep and pretty rich. And I looked at technology through the concept of liberty, through the concept of power, through the concept of democracy, through the concept of justice, and found that these concepts were very helpful in describing the problems and challenges that lay ahead and that continue to lie ahead. So it was a book about how to think about digital technology, and the way I wrote it was by myself thinking about it, by reading two different types of literature, because in those days, this was pre-2016, there wasn't an enormous literature talking about the internet and artificial intelligence. There was stuff that had come from the 90s and the early noughties, often quite utopian in nature, but the explosion of interest in that subject hadn't happened yet. So I was looking at stuff that was explaining technically what is going on in science and technology, and then going back to the classics of law, jurisprudence, political philosophy, and seeing what happens when these two things collide. And the result for me was just so much fascination and interest. And yeah, it ended up in a book.
You seem to have avoided the temptation, which I think early researchers in new emerging fields often do, which is to invent a new lexicon, new language, to describe and to kind of earmark a new territory in a field. Was that temptation ever there to actually come up with new words and new ways of encapsulating what you were finding, what you felt hadn't actually been described?
The temptation was there. Whether I had the ability to actually do it was a different question. As it happens, I think I found more usefulness in adapting old concepts than in coining entirely new ones. So, for instance, in future politics, I surmise that in the future we might have new types of political ideology. So what I describe, for instance, as digital republicanism, digital nationalism, digital socialism. A digital socialist believes that powerful digital technologies should be under the control and ownership of the state. A digital nationalist believes that the purpose of technological development is to empower the state vis-a-vis other states and to enable domination. These were kind of nascent political ideas that I still think are bubbling up. But you'll see that they're not kind of new mintages, that I've taken old ideas and put the word digital in front of them, but used it to describe something hopefully a little bit more textured than that.
Yeah, and hopefully the uptake will be richer when it's closer to current usage.
I've come up with a few terms in my time, like new ones. For instance, the digital life world, which no one uses at all. But maybe in time.
Hashtag digital life world.
Exactly.
Another area I found really interesting in your book was on power, and I came away from your book with probably a little bit more questions actually as to what we do with that transition of power. There are companies at the moment with a lot of power in this space. Historically, governments lag behind the regulation to then manage that power, control that power. I'm interested to hear if, because the world is moving so quickly from when you published, and I think you're writing a new book, and I'm sure you're going to say more. Do you think that government needs to be a little bit more in front of the conversation and managing the control of power in the digital life world?
And indeed, thank you, Ade. Possibly the first time it's ever been used in the wild by someone other than me, so I appreciate it. Yes, so listen, I left future politics with the burning question, what are we going to do about the rise of this new form of power? Because the argument I made in future politics was that digital technology gives power to those who own, control, design, and operate it. And I won't go into all the arguments in favor of that, but there are 3 or 4 different dimensions of that. But if that thesis is right, then there needs to be an answer about how you hold it accountable. Not just when it's powerful tech companies, but also how digital technology can be used by states, which are themselves enormous concentrations of power. I have thought of answers to those questions. And in my book, The Digital Republic, which came out in 2022...
Which I've not bought yet, but I'll remember to do.
I'm sure your daughter is begging you, just waiting for her next birthday and or Christmas. And when that tome finally lands on your doorstep, it contains what I think is necessary, which is new laws, new regulations, new standards. I know it sounds like a really exciting read. I've tried to make it interesting, but basically, new regulators, new systems and structures, because my fundamental thesis is that power is fine. There's always been power in society. Some groups have it, some groups don't. The problem is unaccountable power. When one group in society or various groups can use power to get their way if they need to be at the expense of others. That's a disease that eats away at society. It makes it more unequal, it makes it more unhappy, it makes it more likely to dissolve. So if we can find rules and systems that hold unaccountable power to account, then we will live in a world where I think digital technology blossoms and benefits for all of us and does things that we want it to do. It makes our democracy stronger, not weaker, makes us more free, not less free, improves the quality of social justice rather than undermines it. That's all stuff that I think can be achieved, at least in part, through wise laws and wise regulations. And, you know, putting my barrister hat on for a second, it's clear that Parliament and regulators are beginning now to think pretty carefully about this stuff, but we really are at base camp.
We really are, and it's interesting as well because, as you might know, I am really interested. You know, having lived in East London all my life, I'm part of a group that's built a policy ChatGPT chatbot.
Love it.
westhamandbeckton.com, and very limited power, but the AI chatbot is helping answering questions from hundreds of constituents in the new constituency, and I am getting a rich vein of data about what people are interested in, and then there's also power in what I train the AI bot in how it responds.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that we need the kind of laws and rules sooner rather than later? Because I'm sure there are other people like me who are using AI maybe for even more nefarious reasons, but I'm very wanting to help local people.
Yeah.
And with current stories like we see with the US election, Trump AI images with black people that look really real to the untrained eye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a lot in that question. So, I mean, firstly, I do think we are going to need new rules just for human beings who work with AI, whether they are the creators of AI, whether they are the application level users or implementers of AI, because they need to have responsibilities. Someone in your position might have, should maybe have quite mild responsibilities, but maybe some responsibilities. And if you think about other people in society who gain a measure of power, bankers, doctors, lawyers, we don't just rely on their goodwill to expect them to do the right thing. We put in place laws and regulations to make sure that when they fall short, they're held to account. So yeah, I do think we're going to need rules for all of that stuff. When it comes to things like elections, there's a lot of thinking going on just now about what are we going to do about deepfakes, what are we going to do about viral stuff on cryptographic platforms like WhatsApp and Signal, what are we going to do about right-wing extremism and other kinds of extremism online. There's the new online safety regime, which is coming into force with the act has passed, but it's coming into force but won't probably be enforced by the time of the next general election. So yeah, we're in a bit of a transitional period just now. It's a shame it's not happening a little faster, but I do think the momentum is building. Just put it this way, when I wrote my first book in 2015, 2016, this was a very low salience political issue, right at the bottom. And it's not the top one now, but it's moving up through the ranks. And I think if we have this conversation again, as I hope we do in 5 or 10 years' time, you will find that it is up there with the biggest public policy questions of our time.
The opportunities for innovations in sectors, unparalleled and underexplored at the moment. In the legal profession, are you worried? Are you excited for the use cases that AI could do? Are you afraid of your job? Legal reasoning could be achieved?
Yeah, I mean, look, every lawyer who you ask says, yes, it's very exciting, but it doesn't apply to me. I'm not so naive. I being positive about it, I think there are real grounds for positivity. So I think that access to legal knowledge and advice has always been scarce because lawyers are expensive. So the vast majority of people don't have access to lawyers. Most small legal issues and legal disputes and legal problems go unlawyered. People just try to muddle through themselves. What this revolution allows us to imagine is a world in which access to legal wisdom and experience is not just limited to those who can pay a lawyer for it. And I think that is exciting. And by the way, I think the same is true of medicine and of other professional disciplines. Going back to the family connection, this is something that not just my dad, but actually my brother, who's an economist, has also written books about. So we do really have a very strange family business writing and thinking about this stuff. We're not robots, but we do sometimes act like it. So I do believe there's the opportunity for this extraordinary democratization of knowledge and expertise. Is that going to happen by itself if technology is left to develop solely according to market logic? Of course it's not. Of course it's not. The risk is that already powerful groups in society hoard and monopolize these technology for themselves and monetize it.
And if I could just quickly interject, I actually wonder they've seen the experiences of the internet from, whatever it was 20 years ago, and the vision that early adopters had there, and the likes of Jimmy Wells with the Wikipedia Foundation democratizing knowledge, and now we're in a space where actually that may not be true, and in some markets really trying to regulate access to the internet. Do you think commercial operators might see the same thing? And
100%. I think that is such a good analogy. So going back to what I was talking about a moment ago, if you read a lot of literature from the late 90s and early noughties, there was this assumption that because the internet is a networked technology which disperses power to the nodes in the network and isn't concentrated in a center, that once that technology was introduced to society, that society would become more like a network, so that society would become more like the technology. That has happened a little bit. The internet certainly empowers some actors who wouldn't have been empowered if that technology doesn't exist. But the bigger effect has been the other way around. So that technology was born into a world of very powerful nation states and very powerful large corporations. And lo and behold, who dominates the internet? Nation states and corporations. And I'm not actually applying a value judgment to that. I'm just saying that you are right that technologies are stamped by the social conditions into which they are born. And artificial intelligence, which is the kind of next thing that we're all thinking about, that will be no different. And there will be, I don't know how philosophical people are about it, but there will be lots of people who really see it as a way to make money. And there will be lots of people who really see it as a way to make the world better. And those people will be at odds.
Really interesting. There are so many ways that I want to carry this conversation, but I'm conscious of your precious time and mine as well. Let me just go back to you and some of your motivations. And we've spoken privately about maybe trying to join up the pursuit you're making in academia with the legal representation you do. Where does that continue, do you think? Is there a particular niche that you're interested in? What continues to motivate you in this space?
So for a long time as a lawyer, I didn't really do that much work relating to these interesting social and technical issues that we're talking about. That's changed in recent years. I've made a determined effort to get into the space of what you might loosely call technology law. So I do lots of work, which may sound incredibly dull to your listeners, but I do lots of work.
If they're listening to me, they're already all half interested in this.
I do lots of work in the data protection field. I'm also increasingly asked to advise about things like artificial intelligence, social media. I'm working on a book about the new Online Safety Act. So I am enjoying, after more than a decade of trying, a kind of convergence between my two careers, which I hope will bear fruit. And already it's nice that, when I write about the regulation of technology, it's informed by the fact that I have in fact acted for the regulator in a number of, important cases. And likewise, when I act for the regulator, my thinking is informed by my broader intellectual hinterland, where I've actually asked questions like, what are regulators for and what are they trying to achieve? So that's kind of satisfying. There's definitely a kind of future career for me which involves doing that stuff, as well as my other areas of legal interest, for a number of years to come, until I am made redundant by a machine of some kind. Like you, I am interested in politics. I'd only ever do it if I thought that it was something I could do right, and where I was really contributing, and where I thought it was somewhere I could make the greatest impact. I've been very inspired by listening to you talk about it, because I know that I can see that it's a kind of convergence for you of so many different experiences and skills that you've learned, and a kind of wisdom that you've developed.
Thank you.
I don't feel like I'm there yet. Maybe I'll never be, but I don't think politics is something one does lightly, and I'm sure you'd be the first to agree with that. So I'm kind of parking that question.
Yeah. Another space I wanted to just quickly touch on, because you have personally been helpful for me in my engagement with the state with another hat. So just for everyone's, just putting it on the table, I'm a senior civil servant. The early days when I understood, the COVID inquiry was coming, and I thought representation of black and ethnic minority healthcare workers is important, and making sure the inequalities is addressed as we have this conversation, even though it's not your area of expertise. Just wanted to put on record that the early advice you gave to me, and just even thinking, and just even the endorsement that it was a good thing to do, massively helpful. So thank you. When it comes to inequalities in this space, are you concerned? You are close with the regulator, you are close with the state. Do you think enough people in that space understand as well the opportunity that this could exacerbate existing inequalities? Is that part of the conversation, or do you think that's got a long way to go?
No, well, look, it's a huge part of the conversation now. It wasn't 5 or 6 years ago. So if you look at early machine learning systems, you would hear all these disturbing stories about, voice recognition systems which couldn't hear the voices of women because they'd only been trained on male voices.
Crazy.
Or facial recognition systems which couldn't see people of colour because they'd only been trained on white faces. That is something that people are much more aware of now than they were 5 or 6 years ago. And actually, before the kind of generative AI explosion in the last year and a half, the question of algorithmic discrimination was a very live one in technical and policy circles. And in fact, there's been a kind of furore, I don't know if you've seen it with the Google AI in recent months, where people think it's been overcorrected. So, someone said to Google's AI system, can you show me a picture of a Nazi? And it showed a picture of a black guy wearing a swastika. And it was thought, somewhere something's gone wrong with that. But actually, I know where that's come from. That's come from the fact that 5 years ago, people were getting upset because they would type "why do Jews" into Google, and it would be auto-filling. Why do Jews have big noses? Why do Jews love money so much? So these struggles are already taking place within tech companies. There are already things that regulators are interested in. I think there's a lot of genius that's having to be done, though, because I think that what we're trying to do is use older laws to kind of make new stuff more palatable. I'm a big one for kind of development of the law, but I'm also a big one for Parliament stepping up and actually making new laws when it's needed. And big challenge for the next Labour government that it's trying to do a number of things at once that I think are really important. It needs to unleash AI in a way that really lets us benefit from it in terms of public services, healthcare and things like that, education. It needs to make sure it's not discriminatory. It doesn't amplify and worsen existing injustices in the world. But in so doing, it needs not to be so repressive that it creates a competitive disadvantage with, say, the United States, or just kind of crushes innovation. And there's also, if you flip it over, there's a positive thing. I would love to see an environment, a legal environment here where entrepreneurs are incentivized to create technology that leads to social benefit. We're not quite there with that yet either. But Ade, I think I can tell you that things are moving in the right direction, but it's also febrile and unpredictable. Let's talk about it again in 3 years and see what the situation is.
And actually, from my knowledge isn't great on this, but the market correction, I think, for Google shares, or the part of Google that was, responsible for the AI, I think is indicative of actually, commercial business having to be wise to doing things right in a way that society will accept, because its shares went down, I think, when it unleashed the AI and people were spotting these problems, etc., which I think is a good kind of correction. My last question, because we're kind of almost out of time, is for people who might be hearing of this stuff for the first time but are interested. How do they find out more? How do they, what are some of the secrets to kind of getting in this space? And actually, do you think actually people need to do a lot of work before they do, and we don't just have people rocking up trying to dictate new ways of working in this space without actually having the knowledge to do so?
We've got to be inclusive about it. What I really don't want people to think is that they can't have a view on the social and political implications of technological change unless they are software engineers or computer scientists or have learned to code or have trained a machine learning system. That kind of hoarding of knowledge was very fashionable 10 or 15 years ago, but is not now. In the same way that, you can talk intelligently about the social implications of loads of cars being on the street without yourself being able to describe how an engine works. You don't need to be a highly technical expert. It helps to understand what the internet is, how these artificial intelligence systems work, how they differ from human minds, for instance. But that's something that any curious, intelligent layperson can pick up pretty quickly by reading the right things and by watching the right things. And I want people to have that kind of confidence and knowledge, especially young people, because you can't be a full citizen in the 21st century unless you can talk coherently about these subjects. So, don't be put off by all the terminology. Don't be put off by the fact that you don't consider yourself a techie person. If you're watching this, get into it. It's important that everyone has a view, because, well, at least in my view, this is going to assume such political and philosophical importance that we don't want anyone to be left out of the conversation.
Yeah, and if people are interested, I think the first good step is Digital Republic.
Oh, there you go.
And Future Politics.
There you go.
By a certain Jamie Susskind. So we'll leave it there. Again, just to put on record, for what it's worth, how much of a advisor, friend, wise person, supporter you've been to my career in policy over the years. So thank you.
Do you know what?
Thank you for making the time for this conversation as well.
Likewise, I'm a huge admirer. Can't wait to see the things you're going to achieve in the next. Listeners, you may not know, we've known each other for at least a decade, and if the next one is as impressive as this one, I'll be thrilled.
Thank you. We'll leave it there.